Mark Vincent is an executive advisor and a pioneer process consultant, coaching senior leaders through succession, legacy, and third turn career transitions using systems thinking and SAGE groups. With that, Mark, we're thrilled to have you at the live event today and look forward to hearing your presentation.
Well, thank you. I thought I would use these few minutes just to talk about the three turns of executive leadership and how they map into the experience of an organization. And when someone's building an enterprise and they've got people and they've got things, they've got products, they've got services, all this comes together into an intersection. And intersection's getting a little fuzzier these days with AI involved in the middle, where we're like, well, is this a thing or a service, or is this a person, or what is this thing? Do I look at to it as an assistant, or is it a piece of equipment? And as that gets sorted out, you have one more experience with the intersection itself being a little dubious. And how do we think that through? So let me just describe those very, very quickly. And I'm going to use this diagram that's in front of you as a way to map it. So in the left side, you have the current value of an organization. This is jobs that exist and processes that exist and products and services that we sell. And this is often where people spend the first 10 to 15 years of their career. If they're going to be anything other than a line worker, it will then, well, if they are something more than a line worker, they'll move into that second turn. But in the first turn, we're artisans. We are doing what we know what to do. We were trained to use this software or to run this equipment or do this kind of coding, or increasingly now to work with this particular style of a large language model. So this is what I do. This is how I do it. It's repeatable tasks. I'm showing I've got skills. I want to get recognized for my work. Maybe I get to run a project. Maybe I get to have people that I get to work with, and I'll learn if they trust me and if I'm a good team player. Maybe I don't like my career and I need to start over and go back to school and try again. That's all first turn kind of life, but that's almost always played out with what exists already, where we're trying to get more effective, more efficient, have a greater skill set as we go. And that's where we spend that first 15 years. But for some people, they move into the second turn, and that's right dead center in the middle of this diagram, where they're responsible for the organization and they're responsible for the people of the organization, not just learning how to use their own skills, but learning how to lead others and to lead toward a mission and according to some strategy. Folks who do that really well, and many find out, oh, I can't, I got over promoted. I'm going to go back and do this other thing. I'm going to burn out. So they leave. But for those who really do well and have a long, successful run, many of them then have an opportunity to move into what we would call the third turn, where they're looking at future value. They're trying to look into the mist and to see what products or what services are going to be needed for their firm to continue on into the future. Now, I've done some work on this, and I learned just by looking at this Fortune 25 from 1999 to 2024, there are only 4 companies that are still in that Fortune 25. And the companies that remain are very different than they would have been 1999. And I want to say this with a fair bit of certainty. They didn't get to where they are based upon the current value of 1999. They got to where they are or continued on by figuring out the value that didn't yet exist in life. Apple's a great story. It's one of the 4 companies that went on for those 25 years. Well, how they made their money in the 90s is not how they make their money in the 20s. A lot of product mix has changed across the years. And here we are still speculating. Well, what's it going to be like next year? What's it going to be like when Tim Cook finally retires? Who's his successor going to be? They're not going to be able to continue as they are. No company really does. It's about figuring out into the future. So when a leader has gone from being a line worker, an expert in what they do, to running the whole of an organization, even areas where they're not the expert, and they start to move into, I've got to create this future value. I've got to be able to figure out who we will be, and then whoever follows after me, we're going to have to slingshot them in that direction. if our business is going to have continuity and legacy beyond my tenure, to do that, we're back in an entrepreneurial moment where we can't focus just on what we know with certainty. We have to take risks. We have to experiment and hopefully extract the value out and create the processes so that the future value becomes the current value where we're trying to get other kinds of margin. Now, one of the ways this gets done, and that's why we have the diagram here in the center, this little model of an organization, is that when organizations start, they tend to have these roles very, very compressed. So it's very difficult to tell, I'll just use an ice cream analogy, who owns the store and who's dipping the ice cream, because that's one and the same person. But over time, as there's growth and there's success, these roles have to break out, and that leader has to figure out, what am I the most valuable at doing? What's the one thing I should be doing that only I can do? And how do we get others to step in? And so you start to see some separation between an employee, perhaps, and a vendor or a contractor. And you start to see some difference between operating the business and being the executive problem solver for the business, and the interface between vision and mission and the strategy that faces the marketplace. And I also then find that for many organizations, especially small business, the whole stakeholder conversation often does not get built out fast enough. And the result is you have a business that's going, but it's not recapitalizing. And so they miss out on growth opportunities because they're trying to do everything off of cash flow instead of structuring the capital underneath it, keeping stakeholders happy. Another way I sometimes say it is we spend all this time building the organization that faces the customer, and we fail to build the organization that faces back to the stakeholders. And so as we go, in order to be able to move into future value, in order to be able to have my head up if I'm one of those leaders, and to be able to start looking at what's in the future, how we're going to extract it, make it current value, I can't be so deeply buried in the day-to-day operational issues. I don't have the brain space for both. No leader does. And so we have to be able to break those roles apart as a business scales in order to be able to go after the future value. Oftentimes, a long-standing, strong leader who has learned to lead themselves, turn one, learn to lead the organization and its people, turn two, is able then to face and to keep learning and to lead into this thing that we haven't quite yet discovered, that we're going to be pulling into the future. One quick story, Michael, and then I'll be done. I worked with a company over this last year and a half that has a long history of selling this great equipment that they built. I'm not going to get very specific, or somebody might figure out who I'm talking about, but I want to protect their identity. But they make these great products. They've sold them very well for a long time. They're now getting nervous that what they build is going to get reverse engineered, and they're going to be cheaper alternatives on the marketplace. They can't just go with their current value and try to get more margin and more customers. They've never put together an innovation pipeline, a way to invent and patent and get new products on the market that are extensions of what they have always been building. And so now they're creating this thing that will help them track the ideas into becoming real products. But that also means they have to change their culture in order to be innovative and not just be repeating people. And they're thinking, well, that may mean we've got to create new positions that we don't have. Maybe this won't work and we're going to need to spin something off in order to be able to be innovative. That's stuff they're figuring out here that's all shrouded in the mist. But if they don't do it, all of their forecasts are going to be that they're going to get undercut in their market. And that's a very scary place to be. A secure, bricks and mortar, blue chip kind of a business that knows it can't do it that way next. And anything they do from here, they can educate themselves and they can grow, but it's still going to be guesswork. And that is this work in that third turn as we prepare something that we then hand off to others. So, Michael, that's where I'll stop this. I feel really privileged just to share this kind of a flow toward the leadership that does things that impact people that we don't know yet. But that's ultimately what leadership will do.
Mark, I think that adds a lot of value for a lot of the executives that are at the event today. Clearly, you've worked with a whole range of organizations over the years, and many have implemented a lot of these concepts into where they're headed.
Yes.
Can you share a little bit uh, about what you've seen over the years for outcomes that may be very different than what organizations expected as they were implementing some of these?
Yes, I think that's a great question. Let's start with the fact that if you knew the answers ahead of time, then you'd already have a script. If you already have the script, then you're not dealing with future value. You're dealing with current knowledge. You'd already know. So one of the best skills that we bring with us throughout our career is the learning posture, to go after our curiosity right away. Well, if we're going after our curiosity right away, we're going into what we don't know. So we're going to keep discovering things that are not what we would have scripted had we been writing a script. We're going to get to stumble over opportunities. We're going to get to make connections and intersections that we would not have learned about had we not had our eyes open and our heads up. When our heads are down and we only want to go with what we're certain about, with what we already know, we're already losing because we're not seeing the new opportunities. When you look at the great inventions, let's just take X-ray, let's take vulcanized rubber. That's not necessarily what they were seeking when they discovered them. They're trying other things. What's this? Well, what can we do with this? And the only reason that happened is because experimentation was taking place. So we end up with these highly valuable technologies and processes and products and services because we're experimenting and trying, not because we're going in with a certainty that we've already defined. That usually ends up with disgrace because then we start cooking the numbers to satisfy what we've already concluded. So if we can just strip that and start with, I don't know, isn't that great? Let's go discover. Let's ask the questions. Then we will trip over these things. And that's where all of the stories come from. The unintended side effect that becomes the centerpiece in the end. And I have a very personal experience with this. My wife, who's now deceased, my first wife, she was such an outlier in her cancer treatment that a number of the processes that are out there as standard now were things that for her in her time were outlier effects, things that were not expected. Well, this worked with her. Why did it work with her and not everybody else? And as a result, when she passed, we donated her body to science, and a medical college spent an oncology department spent 3 years working with her cell structures and the stuff around the tumors to find things that are now much more, they've built many more of the individualized approaches to cancer as opposed to, oh, you've got cancer, we're going to give you this drug. And that's one more very personal example for me.
Sure. Now, Mark, I know obviously you've worked with such a range of organizations and written so much thought leadership, you know, material over the years, but if you were sitting down with an executive, how would you explain third turn to a founder in simple terms?
Very good question. I would ask them what's next for them. I just start there. Tell me your story. Tell me where you're at. There's probably a reason why we got set up to talk. So tell me about that. But where from here? Where are you going from here? And what I'm listening for is if they're talking about a future that's going to be in someone else's hands because they can start to see it versus one that they're going to continue. So like if they say something like, in 5 years, we want to be here, but man, I'm not sure I'll be the right person to do this. That's a sign that they're moving into a third turn. They can conceive of a future where the organization continues, but under somebody else's care. And just in the last week, we've had a couple of high-profile CEOs step down saying, I don't think I'm the guy or the gal to lead into an AI future. It's not my background. My brain's not wired that way. I'm seeing the difference. I will not be adding value anymore, and I'm going to be a wise person and move to the side so that others can rise. That's clearly recognizing that you're moving into the third turn. You're making strategic decisions without it necessarily benefiting your golden parachute or your value event. But you can see it sooner if you're strategizing and creating the possibilities And either because the calendar days are turning or because of the skill set that's required, you can see the handoff looming. That's how I would talk about it. And if someone brings that story up, then you start asking other questions like, so what are you going to do? What do you have in mind? Do you have a successor? Are there any board policies around this? All things that can help make it a very smooth, meaningful, a very beautiful story in the end.
So I know a lot of individuals listening today will have questions related to your presentation. Coming up at the top of the hour, I know you'll be joining us for the Q&A panel at the live event. So for everyone that is listening live, if you type in any questions for Mark into the Q&A box that you see right in front of you, we'll get to as many of those as we can during the live Q&A panel.